The dust from the stagecoach wheels settled around Eleanor Lawrence's worn boots as she stood at the ticket window in Ordway, Colorado, staring at the agent with mounting desperation while he repeated the fare amount that might as well have been $1,000 for all the chance she had of paying it. "Madam, it's $12 to Denver." "That's the rate, been the same for months now," the agent said, not unkindly, but with the tired patience of a man who'd heard every sob story the frontier had to offer. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she counted out the coins in her palm for the third time. $7.30. It was everything she had left in this world after burying her father 3 days ago. The consumption had taken him slowly, eating away at both his body and their savings until there was nothing left but a pine box and a grave outside town. Her aunt in Denver was her only living relative, the only person who might take her in, but Denver might as well have been on the moon if she couldn't afford the stagecoach fare. "I have $7, she said quietly, knowing it wouldn't be enough but unable to stop herself from trying. "Could I work for the rest? Clean the coach, help with luggage?" The agent shook his head. "Company don't work that way, miss. I'm sorry, truly I am." She stepped away from the window, blinking back tears that she refused to let fall in public. She was 21 years old and alone in a world that had little mercy for women in her position. The boarding house where she and her father had rented a room wanted their back rent. She had no skills that would earn her enough money quickly, no friends with means to lend her what she needed, no options that didn't lead down roads she wasn't willing to travel. The October sun was warm on her face as she stood outside the stage office, watching other passengers load their belongings. A prosperous-looking merchant and his wife, 2 men in business suits discussing mining ventures, a cattle rancher she recognized from around town. All of them able to pay $12 without blinking, while she stood there with her father's old carpet bag and no future she could see clearly. "You need passage on the stage." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe further south. Eleanor turned to find herself looking up at a man who embodied everything she'd ever imagined when she thought of cowboys. He was tall, lean but broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His eyes were an unusual shade of green, striking against his tanned face, and they regarded her with curiosity and something that might have been concern. "I do, but I can't afford it," she admitted, too tired and heartsick to pretend otherwise. "I'm short on the fare." He studied her for a moment, taking in her threadbare but clean dress, the carefully mended shawl around her shoulders, the brave lift of her chin despite the desperation she knew must show in her eyes. She studied him right back, noting the worn but quality leather of his boots, the Colt revolver on his hip that looked well-maintained, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. "How short?" he asked. $4.70, she said, hating how the words tasted like begging. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions or make her explain. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, counted out $5 silver, and pressed them into her hand before she could protest. "But I can't," she started, trying to give the money back. "I have no way to repay you." "Didn't ask you to repay me," he said simply. "My name's Tanner Xavier. I'm taking the stage to Denver myself, just bought my ticket. You need to get to Denver," she nodded, still holding the coins like they might burn her. "My aunt lives there. She's expecting me." That last part was a lie, but a small one. Her aunt didn't know Eleanor was coming, didn't know her brother had died, but Eleanor had to believe she'd be welcomed anyway. "Then go buy your ticket," Tanner said. "Stage leaves in 20 minutes. "I don't understand why you do this for a stranger," Eleanor said, searching his face for some ulterior motive. some expectation that would come with conditions she couldn't meet. Tanner's expression softened. My sister once needed help from a stranger. Someone gave it to her when I wasn't there to do it myself. Figure I'm just passing along what someone else started. Now go on, before the agent closes his window for loading. Eleanor found herself moving toward the ticket office, glancing back once to see Tanner Xavier watching her with patient eyes. She bought her ticket with shaking hands, combining his $5 with her own meager savings. When she emerged with the precious slip of paper, she found him waiting near the stagecoach, a worn saddle bag slung over his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate for what he'd just given her. "I'm Eleanor Lawrence." "Good to meet you properly, Miss Lawrence," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You might want to claim a seat inside before the others come. It's a long ride to Denver." The stagecoach was a Concorde stage, painted red and yellow with leather thoroughbraces that would supposedly make the ride more comfortable, though Eleanor had her doubts. She'd never actually been on a stagecoach before. She and her father had come to Ordway 5 years ago in a wagon train, back when her mother was still alive, and they'd had dreams of starting fresh in Colorado. She chose a seat facing forward, having heard that sitting backward could make you sick on rough roads. Tanner climbed in after her and settled onto the same bench, but at a respectful distance. The merchant and his wife took the opposite bench, barely glancing at Eleanor and Tanner. The two businessmen squeezed in beside the couple, leaving the rancher to grumble about riding up top with the driver. "All aboard for Denver," the driver called. "We'll be stopping at Elbert Station for fresh horses and supper. Any other stops are for emergencies or nature's call, so speak up now if you need anything." No one spoke up. The driver climbed to his seat, the shotgun messenger beside him already scanning the horizon with experienced eyes. The Butterfield Overland Mail Company had a reputation for getting passengers through safely. But road agents and hostile encounters weren't unheard of in these parts, especially in 1883, when the West was still wild despite the railroad's civilizing influence. The stage lurched forward, and Eleanor gripped the leather strap hanging from the ceiling. Tanner sat relaxed beside her, his body swaying easily with the coach's motion like he'd done this 100 times before. He probably had. Cowboys traveled where the work took them, following cattle drives, signing on with different ranches, always moving. "First time on a stage?" Tanner asked quietly, noticing her white-knuckled grip. "Is it that obvious?" Eleanor tried to smile, though her stomach was already protesting the swaying motion. "You'll get used to it after a few miles. Try not to fight the movement, just let your body roll with it." She tried to do as he suggested, forcing her muscles to relax. Across from them, the merchant's wife had already closed her eyes, a handkerchief pressed to her nose against the dust that seeped in through every crack and crevice. The businessmen were deep in discussion about silver prices, ignoring everyone else. "What takes you to Denver, Mr. Xavier?" Eleanor asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from the increasingly rough ride as they left Ordway behind. "Work," he said. "Got an offer to work a ranch north of Denver, breeding operation for cutting horses. I've been down in New Mexico territory the past 2 years, working cattle, but it's time to try something different. You work with horses, cattle, whatever needs doing. But I've always had a way with horses. My father taught me before he died. Said a man who could train a good horse would never go hungry." Eleanor heard the echo of her own loss in his words. "When did you lose him?" 10 years ago. I was 17. Rode with cattle drives for a few years after that, then started hiring on at different ranches." "You learn a lot that way, seeing how different outfits do things." My father just died, Eleanor heard herself say. 3 days ago, consumption. That's why I'm going to Denver to my aunt. I have nowhere else to go. Tanner's eyes filled with understanding and sympathy. I'm real sorry for your loss, Miss Lawrence. Consumption's a hard way to go. My mother went the same way when I was young. They fell into silence as the coach rattled over the rutted road. The landscape outside was the high plains of eastern Colorado, rolling grassland dotted with yucca and prickly pear cactus. In the distance, Eleanor could see the Rocky Mountains rising like a promise, the peaks already dusted with early snow that gleamed white against the brilliant blue sky. The merchant's wife began to snore softly. One of the businessmen pulled out a flask and offered it to his companion, who declined. The whiskey smell made Eleanor's stomach turn, and she focused on the horizon, trying to find something stable to anchor her gaze. Here, Tanner said, offering her a canteen. Small sips of water help sometimes. She accepted gratefully, the water cool and sweet. Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me. You'd have figured something out. You seem like someone who doesn't give up easy. I don't feel very strong right now, she admitted. Everything I knew is gone. My father was all I had left. My mother died when I was 16. No siblings. My aunt is my father's sister, but I haven't seen her in 6 years. She might not even want me showing up on her doorstep. Any family's got to be better than being alone in a town with no prospects, Tanner said. Denver's growing fast. Even if your aunt can't take you in, there'll be work there. Plenty of families need housekeepers, nannies, cooks. Eleanor nodded, though the thought of working as a servant in someone else's home made her heart sink. Not because she was too proud, she'd do any honest work, but because it felt like the final confirmation that all her father's dreams for her had died with him. He'd wanted her to marry well, to have security and comfort. Instead, she was heading to Denver with less than $3 to her name and no prospects whatsoever. The miles rolled by in a blur of dust and jolting movement. The sun climbed higher, heating the inside of the coach until sweat trickled down Eleanor's spine. She'd removed her shawl within the first hour, and now she wished she could remove her bonnet too, but that would be improper with strangers present. Tanner seemed unbothered by the heat. He'd pushed his hat back on his head and was gazing out the window with the patient endurance of someone used to discomfort. Eleanor found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. He had strong features, not handsome in a refined way, but appealing in the rugged manner of men who lived hard outdoor lives. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with rope and leather and iron. But his fingers were long and capable looking, and she remembered how gentle his touch had been when he'd pressed those coins into her palm. Why had he helped her? Eleanor had learned to be suspicious of unexpected kindness. In her experience, men usually wanted something in return, especially from young women alone in the world. But Tanner had asked for nothing, expected nothing, seemed content to sit beside her in companionable silence as the miles disappeared beneath the stage's wheels. Miss Lawrence. Tanner's voice pulled her from her thoughts. You all right? You looked far away just then. Just thinking, she said. About my aunt, about what I'll do in Denver, about everything that's happened. It's a lot to carry, he acknowledged. Grief's heavy on its own without adding worry about the future on top. Did you have anyone when your father died? Or were you alone like me? I had my sister, Sarah. She was 14 then. I did my best to take care of her, but it was hard. We had no family willing to take us both, so I hired on with a cattle outfit that would let me bring her along. She spent 2 years living in bunkhouses and line camps before she was old enough to work as a schoolteacher. She's married now, living in Texas with a good man. 3 kids last I heard. You must miss her. I do. But she's happy, and that's what matters. I get down to see her when I can, write letters the rest of the time. He smiled, a genuine warm expression that changed his whole face. She keeps threatening to find me a wife, says I'm too old to be wandering around alone. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking? 27. Ancient by some standards, I suppose. Eleanor smiled despite herself. Practically 1 foot in the grave. What about you, Miss Lawrence? How old are you? 21. And I feel about 100 years old right now. Grief'll do that to you. But you're young yet. You've got time to build a new life in Denver. The stage hit a particularly deep rut, bouncing Eleanor hard against the side panel. Tanner's hands shot out instinctively to steady her, gripping her arm gently until the coach settled back into its normal rough rhythm. "Thank you," she said, very aware of the warmth of his hand through her sleeve even after he'd released her. "Driver must be pushing to make up time," Tanner observed, leaning to look out the window. "Sun's past noon. We should reach Elbert Station in another hour or so." The merchant woke with a snort, disturbing his wife, who glared at him with the long-suffering expression of a woman used to her husband's flaws. The businessmen had given up on conversation and sat in miserable silence, their fine suits coated with dust, despite all their efforts to stay clean. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to her father, to the last words he'd spoken. "Find your Aunt Margaret," he'd whispered, his hand cold in hers. "She'll take care of you. Promise me you'll go to her." Eleanor had promised, even though she barely remembered Aunt Margaret beyond a stern woman in a letter who disapproved of her brother's decision to try his luck in Colorado. "You're thinking about your father again," Tanner said softly. "It wasn't a question. How did you know?" "You get a certain look, sad and far away. I recognize it because I probably wore the same expression for months after my father passed." "Does it get easier?" Eleanor asked. "The grief, I mean." "It gets different," Tanner said carefully. "Less sharp, more like a dull ache you carry with you. You learn to live with it, to remember the good times more than the hard ending. But it takes time." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the quiet of two people who understood loss. Eleanor found herself relaxing despite the uncomfortable journey, despite the uncertainty ahead. There was something steady about Tanner Xavier, something that made her feel less alone even though they'd only just met. The stage slowed as they approached Elbert Station, a ramshackle collection of buildings clustered around a larger structure that served as a combination-way station, tavern, and trading post. The shotgun messenger climbed down first, rifle ready, scanning the area before nodding to the driver that it was safe. 20 minutes to stretch your legs and take care of necessities," the driver announced. "Fresh horses'll be ready. We got stew and bread inside if you're hungry, $1 a plate." Eleanor's stomach growled at the mention of food. She'd been too heartsick to eat breakfast, and it had been nearly 8 hours since then. But $1 was precious, one of only 2 she had left. She'd have to make do without. Tanner helped her down from the coach, his hands strong and sure on her waist. The touch sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. She stepped away quickly, flustered by her reaction. "I'm going to go," she gestured vaguely toward the privy visible behind the main building. "I'll wait here," Tanner said. "You shouldn't wander off alone." Eleanor appreciated his concern but also felt a flash of irritation at being treated like a child. She was a grown woman, capable of walking to an outhouse by herself. But then she noticed the rough-looking men lounging near the stable, watching the stage passengers with calculating eyes, and decided maybe Tanner's caution wasn't misplaced. When she emerged from the privy, Tanner was waiting exactly where he'd said he'd be. The other passengers had gone inside the way station, drawn by the smell of food and the promise of coffee. "You hungry?" Tanner asked. "I'm fine," Eleanor lied. He gave her a knowing look. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday evening," she admitted. Without another word, Tanner took her elbow and steered her toward the way station. "Come on. Can't have you fainting from hunger before we reach Denver." "I can't afford," she started, but he cut her off. "I'm buying. And before you argue, consider it payment for your company on this ride. Gets lonely traveling alone and your good conversation." Eleanor wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some dignity, but her stomach betrayed her with another loud growl. Tanner grinned, and she found herself smiling back helplessly. The interior of the way station was dim and smoky, crowded with travelers and locals. A woman with iron-gray hair and a formidable presence stood behind a makeshift counter, ladling stew from a pot that looked like it could feed an army. "2 plates," Tanner said, placing coins on the counter. "And 2 coffees if you have it." The woman nodded, filled 2 tin plates with thick stew that smelled of venison and vegetables, and plunked down 2 tin cups of coffee so strong Eleanor could probably stand a spoon in it. They found a spot at a rough-hewn table in the corner, away from the main crowd. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to wolf down the food despite her hunger. The stew was simple but good, well seasoned and hot. The coffee was terrible, bitter and strong enough to strip paint, but it was warm and reviving. "Thank you," she said between bites. "You've been very kind to me." "It's just stew, Miss Lawrence." "It's more than that. The stage fare looking out for me now this. I'm not used to such generosity." Tanner set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "I'm not looking for anything in return if that's what's worrying you. I've got a sister, remember. I know what it's like for women alone out here. Sometimes a person just needs help, no strings attached. Not many men think that way." "Then you've been around the wrong men." Eleanor couldn't argue with that. Most of the men in Ordway had looked at her with varying degrees of speculation after her father got sick, calculating her value as potential wife or mistress, measuring her desperation. She'd had 2 marriage proposals, both from men old enough to be her grandfather, both making it clear they expected gratitude for their interest. "You're right about that," she said. "Thank you for being different." They finished eating in companionable silence. Eleanor felt better with food in her stomach, more capable of facing whatever came next. She watched Tanner as he ate, noting the efficient way he moved, wasting no motion. Everything about him spoke of competence and capability. "Time's up," the driver called from outside. "Mount up, we're moving out." The afternoon portion of the journey was longer and more grueling than the morning had been. The road deteriorated into little more than a track across the prairie, rutted and rough. The coach bounced and swayed so violently that conversation became nearly impossible. Eleanor clung to the leather strap and tried not to be sick. Somewhere around the 3rd hour, she must have dozed off despite the rough ride, because she woke to find her head resting on Tanner's shoulder. She jerked upright, mortified, but he just smiled. "You needed the rest," he said quietly. "Don't fret about it." The sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The landscape had changed as they traveled west, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and rocky outcroppings. In the distance, the Rockies loomed larger, no longer a distant promise but an immediate presence. "We'll reach Denver by dark," Tanner said. "Another 2 hours, maybe 3 if we don't have any trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Eleanor asked, not sure she wanted to know. "Road agents sometimes. Though the Butterfield stages usually run clean. They've got a reputation, and most outlaws know better than to tangle with their guards. Could be weather, but it looks clear enough. Or we could break an axle, throw a wheel. Usual problems." Have you been on a stage that was robbed? Once, down in New Mexico, 3 men with bandanas over their faces, guns drawn. They took everyone's money and valuables, but nobody got hurt. Most road agents don't want to kill anyone, just want easy money. Eleanor thought about her remaining $2, her father's silver pocket watch tucked deep in her carpet bag. It was all she had left of him, and the thought of losing it to thieves made her want to cry. As if sensing her distress, Tanner said, "Don't worry. Like I said, Butterfield stages usually run clean. We'll be fine." He was right. The remaining hours passed without incident, the coach rattling through the gathering dusk as oil lamps were lit inside. The merchant and his wife dozed. The businessmen stared out the windows in weary silence. And Eleanor found herself acutely aware of Tanner beside her, his solid presence somehow reassuring in ways she couldn't quite articulate. She tried not to think about what would happen when they reached Denver. He'd go his way to the horse ranch north of the city. She'd go to her aunt's house on Larimer Street if she could find it. They'd probably never see each other again. The thought bothered her more than it should for someone she'd just met. "Miss Lawrence," Tanner said, breaking into her thoughts. "Eleanor. Can I call you Eleanor?" The use of her first name sent another flutter through her stomach. "Yes, of course. Eleanor, do you have your aunt's address?" "I have a letter she sent my father 2 years ago. The return address is on it." "That's good. But Denver's grown a lot in 2 years. Streets change, neighborhoods expand. If you can't find her right away, do you have a plan?" Eleanor hadn't thought that far ahead, had been operating on faith that somehow everything would work out. "I suppose I'll find a boarding house for the night. Ask around until I locate her." "You have money for a boarding house?" "A little," she hedged, not wanting to admit how little. Tanner was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor could practically hear him thinking. "The ranch I'm going to, the Bar T, it's owned by a man named Thomas Tucker. Good man, fair employer. His wife runs a respectable boarding house in Denver, place called Tucker House. Clean rooms, decent rates, safe for women alone. If you can't find your aunt right away, that's where you should go. Tell Mrs. Tucker that I sent you. She'll treat you fair." "You don't have to keep helping me," Eleanor said, though she was grateful for the information. "I know I don't have to. I want to. You remind me of my sister, Sarah, back when she was alone and scared after our father died. I wasn't much help to her then, being not much more than a kid myself. Let me do better now." Eleanor blinked back tears. "You're a good man, Tanner Xavier." "I try to be." Denver appeared gradually, lights twinkling in the darkness like fallen stars. What had been a mining camp during the Pikes Peak gold rush of 1859 had grown into a proper city of nearly 40,000 people. Buildings rose 2 and 3 stories high. Street lamps glowed at corners. The sound of music and laughter drifted from saloons and dance halls. The stage rolled down 16th Street, past the imposing bulk of the Windsor Hotel with its 5 stories of Victorian grandeur, past shops and banks and restaurants. People crowded the boardwalks despite the late hour, going about their business in a city that never quite slept. The stage depot was on 17th Street, a large building with corrals and stables attached. The coach rolled to a stop, and the driver called out their arrival. Passengers stirred, gathering belongings, preparing to disembark. Tanner climbed down first, then turned to help Eleanor. His hands on her waist again, strong and sure, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. For a moment they stood close together, his hands still on her waist, her hands on his shoulders, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Possibility. The acknowledgement that something had begun between them during this long day's journey. "Miss Lawrence," a voice called, breaking the moment. The depot agent was calling for passengers to claim their luggage. Eleanor stepped back, flustered. She collected her carpet bag, which was also the only luggage she had. Tanner retrieved his saddle bag and a rifle case she hadn't noticed before. "You need help finding your aunt's house?" he asked. "I should be fine," Eleanor said, though she felt anything but fine. Denver was huge and strange, and the darkness made everything more intimidating. "It's past 9 o'clock at night," Tanner pointed out. "You can't go knocking on doors looking for your aunt at this hour. Let me at least see you to Tucker House. Make sure you get settled safe." Eleanor wanted to refuse, wanted to prove she could manage on her own, but practicality won out over pride. "All right. Thank you." Tucker House was on Blake Street, a 10-minute walk from the depot through streets that were still busy with evening traffic. It was a 3-story building, well-maintained, with a sign hanging from the porch that read Tucker House, respectable lodging for ladies and gentlemen. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying blonde hair answered Tanner's knock. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Tanner Xavier. Thomas said you'd be coming through Denver on your way to the ranch. Come in, come in." Then she noticed Eleanor and her expression shifted to polite curiosity. "And who's this?" "Mrs. Tucker, this is Miss Eleanor Lawrence. She needs a room for at least tonight, maybe longer. I told her you ran the finest boarding house in Denver." Mrs. Tucker's smile was warm and welcoming. "Well, any friend of Tanner's is welcome here. Come in, dear, you look exhausted. Have you eaten?" "Yes, madam, at Elbert Station. That was hours ago." "Come to the kitchen. I'll make you a sandwich. Tanner, you too. You must be hungry after that long stage ride." The kitchen was warm and welcoming, with a large table and a stove that radiated heat. Mrs. Tucker bustled around, pulling out bread and cold meat and cheese, assembling sandwiches with practiced efficiency. "Now, Miss Lawrence, Tanner said you might need a room for a few days." Mrs. Tucker prompted gently. "I'm looking for my aunt, Margaret Lawrence. Well, her married name is Margaret Stanton. She lives on Larimer Street, or at least she did 2 years ago. I have her address, but I haven't been able to send word that I was coming." "Margaret Stanton," Mrs. Tucker repeated thoughtfully. "I don't know her personally, but Larimer Street isn't far from here. We can ask around in the morning. I'm sure someone knows her." "How much for a room?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. 50 cents a night, includes breakfast and supper. You'd be sharing with one other lady, a schoolteacher who's very quiet and respectable." Eleanor did the math in her head. She had $2. 4 nights if she didn't spend money on anything else, and then she'd be completely penniless. But she didn't have a choice. "I'll take the room," she said. "Thank you." After they ate, Mrs. Tucker showed Eleanor to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. 2 narrow beds, a washstand, a chest of drawers. A window looked out onto Blake Street. It was simple but comfortable, and Eleanor felt tension drain from her shoulders as she set down her carpet bag. "Your roommate, Miss Harriet, is visiting her sister tonight, so you'll have the room to yourself. Breakfast is at 7, supper at 6. There's a bathing room at the end of the hall. Hot water costs extra, but there's always cold water in the pitcher. Do you need anything else?" "No, madam, this is perfect. Thank you so much." Mrs. Tucker patted her hand. "You get some rest, dear. Things always look better in the morning." When Mrs. Tucker left, Eleanor expected to be alone, but she found Tanner waiting in the hallway outside her room. "I wanted to make sure you were settled," he said. "I'm staying at the Bar T Ranch starting tomorrow, but I'll be in town sometimes. If you need anything, you can leave a message for me here with Mrs. Tucker." "You've done so much already," Eleanor said. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. But Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you find your aunt, if things don't work out the way you hope, will you let me know? Promise me you won't just disappear without telling someone." "Why does it matter?" Eleanor asked, searching his face. Tanner looked uncomfortable, like he was struggling with words. Because I'd worry. Because in one day you've become someone I care about, and I want to know you're all right. Because if your aunt can't help you, maybe I can help you find work, or at least make sure you're safe. Eleanor's heart was pounding. You care about me. More than I probably should for someone I just met, he admitted. I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy, Eleanor said softly. I care about you too. I don't understand it, but I do. They stood in the dim hallway, a proper distance apart but connected by something neither of them could quite name. Tanner reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. Get some rest, he said. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon to see how you're doing if that's all right with you. I'd like that very much. He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that transformed his face. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Tanner. Eleanor watched him walk down the stairs, then went into her room and closed the door. She leaned against it, her heart still racing, her cheek tingling where he'd touched her. She barely knew him. They'd spent one day together. It was foolish to feel this way, to feel like something important had begun. But she did feel that way, and as she prepared for bed in the strange room in the strange city, she found herself thinking not about her uncertain future, but about green eyes and gentle hands, and a cowboy who'd helped her for no reason except kindness. Morning came bright and early. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of the city coming to life outside. For a moment she forgot where she was, then memory flooded back. Denver, Tucker House. Her father dead, her aunt somewhere in this sprawling city, and Tanner Xavier a presence in her thoughts that wouldn't be pushed aside. She washed with cold water from the pitcher, changed into her other dress which was hardly less worn than the one she'd traveled in, and made her way downstairs to breakfast. The dining room was full of boarders, mostly working men but a few women as well. Mrs. Tucker presided over the room like a benevolent general, making sure everyone had coffee and biscuits and eggs. Eleanor found a seat at the end of one long table and ate quietly, listening to the chatter around her. Miss Lawrence, Mrs. Tucker, appeared at her elbow. I asked around this morning about your aunt. Margaret Stanton lives at 426 Larimer Street, just 3 blocks from here. She's a widow, takes in sewing to support herself. She's well thought of in the neighborhood. Relief flooded through Eleanor so powerfully she felt dizzy. Thank you, Mrs. Tucker, thank you so much. Would you like me to walk with you, introduce you properly? That's very kind, but I should go alone. I don't know how she'll react to me showing up unannounced. Mrs. Tucker nodded understanding. Well, if you need anything, you come right back here. And remember, your room's paid through tonight, so you have a safe place no matter what happens. Eleanor hadn't paid for the room yet, had planned to do so that evening after breakfast, but she didn't correct Mrs. Tucker's assumption. She'd settle the bill later. The walk to 426 Larimer Street took less than 10 minutes. Eleanor's stomach churned with nerves. What if Aunt Margaret didn't want her? What if she was angry that Eleanor hadn't written first? What if she couldn't afford to take in another mouth to feed? Number 426 was a modest house, 2 stories, painted white with blue shutters. A small garden in front showed the careful attention of someone who loved growing things. Eleanor stood at the gate for a full minute, gathering courage, before walking up the path and knocking on the door. The woman who answered was in her 50s, thin and angular with Eleanor's father's same blue eyes. She wore a simple dress and had a measuring tape draped around her neck. She stared at Eleanor with dawning recognition. Eleanor, is that you? Good Lord, child, you're all grown up. I hardly recognized you. Aunt Margaret, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. I'm sorry to come without warning. My father, he died last week. Consumption. Before he passed, he told me to come to you. I had nowhere else to go. Her aunt's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, sadness, concern, and finally resignation. David's dead. Oh, my poor brother. Come in, child. Come in and tell me everything. The interior of the house was neat and clean, if sparsely furnished. Every surface held evidence of her aunt's sewing work: bolts of fabric, spools of thread, a dress form in the corner wearing a half-finished gown. They sat in the small parlor, and Eleanor told the story of the past months: her father's illness, their dwindling resources, his death, and her desperate journey to Denver. Aunt Margaret listened without interrupting, her hands busy with mending even as she absorbed the sad tale. When Eleanor finished, her aunt sighed deeply. I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man, even if he did have his head in the clouds sometimes. Of course you can stay here, Eleanor. Your family and family takes care of each other. I can't pay you wages. My sewing brings in enough to keep me fed, but not much more. But you'll have a roof and food, and if you can help me with the sewing, we'll get by. Relief and gratitude made Eleanor's eyes sting with tears. Thank you, Aunt Margaret. I'll work hard, I promise. I won't be a burden. You're not a burden, child. You're my niece. Her aunt's expression softened slightly. I know I wasn't always kind to your father. We had our disagreements about his choices. But that's past now. You're here and we'll make the best of it. They spent the rest of the morning discussing practical matters. Eleanor would share the tiny second bedroom. She'd help with the sewing, learn the trade properly so she could take on some of her aunt's simpler commissions. In exchange, she'd have a home. It wasn't the warm, effusive welcome Eleanor might have dreamed of, but it was honest and real. Her aunt was practical and somewhat stern, but not unkind. She'd offered shelter when Eleanor desperately needed it. That was enough. I have a room at Tucker House, paid through tonight, Eleanor said. I should go collect my bag. Tucker House. That's Martha Tucker's place, isn't it? Respectable establishment. You can bring your things back this afternoon. Eleanor walked back to Tucker House feeling like a weight had lifted. She had a place to live. She wouldn't be out on the streets. Her future wasn't bright exactly, but at least it existed. She found herself wishing she could tell Tanner, wanting to share her relief with someone who'd understand what this meant. As if summoned by her thoughts, she found him waiting on the front porch of Tucker House, his hat in his hands, looking like he'd been there a while. Tanner, Eleanor's face lit up. What are you doing here? I thought you'd be at the ranch by now. Told Mr. Tucker I'd be out there this afternoon, had something to take care of in town first. Wanted to see how things went with your aunt. He searched her face. I'm guessing it went well from that smile. She's taking me in. I have a home, Tanner. A real home. Eleanor wanted to hug him but restrained herself, aware they were in public and such displays wouldn't be proper. Tanner's smile matched her own. That's wonderful. I'm real happy for you, Eleanor. It's thanks to you. If you hadn't helped me get here, if you hadn't made sure I was safe last night, I don't know what would have happened. You'd have figured it out. You're stronger than you think. They stood on the porch, grinning at each other like fools, and Eleanor realized she didn't want him to leave. The thought of him riding north to the Bar T Ranch, of not seeing him again, created an hollow ache in her chest. When will you come back to Denver? She asked, trying to sound casual. Mr. Tucker usually gives his hands Sunday afternoons off if they want to come to town. So I suppose I'll be back Sunday, 4 days from now. My aunt lives at 426 Larimer Street, Eleanor said, in case you wanted to visit, just to see how I'm settling in. Tanner's eyes warmed. I'd like that very much, if your aunt wouldn't mind me calling on you. I'm sure she'd be fine with it. Eleanor wasn't sure of any such thing, but she'd deal with her aunt when the time came. They stood there awkwardly, neither wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Tanner cleared his throat. "I should get going. Mr. Tucker's expecting me." "But Eleanor, I meant what I said last night. If you need anything at all, you send word to the bar T. I'll come." "I will. Thank you, Tanner, for everything." He settled his hat on his head, touched the brim in a small salute, and walked away. Eleanor watched until he turned the corner and disappeared from sight, then went inside to collect her carpetbag and settle her bill. Mrs. Tucker waved away her money. "Tanner already paid for your room. Paid for a week, actually, in case you needed it. That young man has a good heart. He paid." "But he shouldn't have. I can pay my own way." He was quite insistent, said he wanted to make sure you had a safe place to stay while you got yourself sorted. "Now, are you sure your aunt has room for you? Because you're welcome to stay here if you need to." Eleanor was touched by the kindness. "My aunt is taking me in, but thank you. You and Mr. Tucker have been so kind to me." "You thank Tanner for that. He's like a son to us. Worked for Thomas 3 years ago before he went down to New Mexico. He's one of the good ones." Eleanor gathered her things and walked back to her aunt's house, her mind full of Tanner Xavier. One day. She'd known him for barely more than a day, and yet he'd changed the trajectory of her life. Without his help, she'd still be in Ordway, desperate and alone. Instead, she was in Denver with a home and a future, and the tentative promise of seeing him again on Sunday. The days between Wednesday and Sunday felt both endless and too short. Eleanor threw herself into learning her aunt's trade, discovering she had a decent hand with a needle. Her aunt was a patient if exacting teacher, showing her how to make tiny, invisible stitches, how to fit a bodice properly, how to trim a hem so it hung perfectly level. "You have good hands for this work," Aunt Margaret said Thursday evening as they sat sewing by lamplight. "Steady and precise. In a few months, you'll be able to take on your own commissions." "I want to earn my keep," Eleanor said. "I don't want to be a burden on you." Her aunt looked at her with something that might have been fondness. "You're not a burden, child. It's actually nice to have company again. I've been alone since my Henry died 3 years ago. The house has been too quiet." Eleanor learned that her aunt's life had been hard. Married young to a man who drank too much, widowed at 50 with no children and no savings, forced to take in sewing to survive. She was bitter about some things, reserved and careful with her emotions, but Eleanor began to see the kindness beneath the stern exterior. Saturday evening, as they sat down to a simple supper of soup and bread, Eleanor gathered her courage. "Aunt Margaret, there's a man who helped me get to Denver, a cowboy named Tanner Xavier. He asked if he could call on me tomorrow just to see how I'm settling in. Would that be all right?" Her aunt's eyebrows rose. "A cowboy? How did you meet him?" Eleanor told the story, how Tanner had paid her stage fare, watched over her during the journey, made sure she got to Tucker House safely. Her aunt listened with a skeptical expression. "And he wants nothing in return for all this help?" Margaret asked. "Nothing. He's just kind." "Men are never just kind, Eleanor. They always want something." "Not Tanner," Eleanor insisted. "He's different," her aunt sighed. "Fine. He can call tomorrow afternoon, but I'll be here the whole time and you'll leave the parlor door open. I won't have people talking about your reputation." Sunday morning crawled by. Eleanor went to church with her aunt, sat through a sermon she didn't hear, and walked home in the autumn sunshine while her aunt chatted with neighbors. She changed into her better dress, the blue calico that wasn't quite as worn as her everyday brown, and tried to calm her racing heart. Tanner arrived at 2 o'clock, looking scrubbed and nervous in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. He carried a small bouquet of late-blooming asters that he presented to Aunt Margaret with polite courtesy. "Mrs. Stanton, Thank you for letting me call on Eleanor." Aunt Margaret accepted the flowers with a nod. "Mr. Xavier, Eleanor tells me you helped her get to Denver." "I did what anyone should do, madam. Couldn't leave her stranded in Ordway." They sat in the parlor, the door open as Aunt Margaret had insisted, while she sat in the adjoining dining room ostensibly mending but clearly listening to every word. Eleanor felt awkward and hyper-aware of Tanner's presence, the way he filled the small room, the way his eyes tracked her movements. "How's the ranch?" she asked. "Good. Hard work, but I expected that. Mr. Tucker has some fine horses, beautiful animals. I'm working with a 3-year-old mare right now, teaching her to cut cattle. She's smart and willing, learning fast." "You enjoy the work." "I do. Always have. There's something satisfying about working with horses, earning their trust, teaching them. It's honest work." They talked about small things, the weather, Denver's growth, the mountains visible from the ranch. But beneath the simple conversation, Eleanor felt something else, an awareness, a connection that had nothing to do with words. She caught Tanner looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. She found herself studying the way his hands moved, remembering their gentleness. After an hour, Tanner stood to leave. "Thank you for the visit, Eleanor. Mrs. Stanton, thank you for your hospitality." "When will you come back to town?" Eleanor asked, walking him to the door. "Next Sunday, if that's all right with you." "I'd like that." At the door, out of her aunt's direct sight but still within earshot, Tanner said quietly, "I've been thinking about you all week." Eleanor's heart hammered. "I've been thinking about you too. Can I write to you? Between visits?" "Yes, please." He smiled, touched the brim of his hat, and left. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, feeling like she could float up to the ceiling. "He seems polite enough," Aunt Margaret said grudgingly from the dining room. "But be careful, Eleanor. Cowboys don't settle. They're always moving, always chasing the next job. Tanner's not like that. He took a permanent position at the bar T." "We'll see," her aunt said, in a tone that suggested she doubted it. But Eleanor refused to let her aunt's skepticism dampen her happiness. Tanner was coming back next Sunday. He'd asked to write to her. Whatever was growing between them had a chance to develop. The letter arrived Thursday, delivered by Mrs. Tucker, who'd received it at her house and kindly brought it to Larimer Street. Eleanor read it 3 times, memorizing every word. "Dear Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well and happy in your new home. I wanted to thank you for letting me visit on Sunday. It was the best part of my week. The work here is good. I've been assigned to work with the cutting horses, which suits me fine. The mare I mentioned is coming along well. She reminds me a bit of you, actually. Delicate-looking but strong underneath, with intelligence in her eyes and more spirit than people might expect. I know we haven't known each other long, but I can't stop thinking about you. I keep remembering the way you looked on the stagecoach, so brave despite being scared. The way your eyes light up when you smile. The sound of your laugh when I said something that amused you. I'd like to court you properly if you'd allow it. I know I'm just a cowboy without much to offer, but I have steady work and good prospects. Mr. Tucker says if I do well with the horses, he'll give me more responsibility and better pay. I'm not a rich man, but I'm honest and hardworking, and I'd treat you right. Think about it. I'll come see you again Sunday, and you can give me your answer then. Yours truly, Tanner Xavier. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, reading it a 4th time. He wanted to court her, properly with serious intentions. After knowing her for barely 2 weeks, it was mad. It was too fast. It was wonderful. "Who's the letter from?" Aunt Margaret asked. "Tanner." Her aunt's lips compressed. "Eleanor, you barely know this man." "I know enough. He's good and kind and honest, and I care about him, Aunt Margaret, more than I've ever cared about anyone. Feelings aren't enough. Marriage requires practical considerations. Can he support a wife? Does he have property? What are his prospects? He has steady work at a good ranch. His employer trusts him. He's skilled with horses. Those are fine prospects, her aunt sighed. You're just like your father, leading with your heart instead of your head. I hope you don't end up disappointed like he was. But Eleanor refused to be discouraged. When Sunday came, she was waiting when Tanner arrived, and before her aunt could settle in to chaperone, Eleanor said, "Can we walk to the park? It's a beautiful day." Aunt Margaret looked like she wanted to refuse, but propriety allowed for chaperoned walks in public places. "Be back in an hour." They walked to Curtis Park, a small green space a few blocks away. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the leaves on the cottonwood trees turning gold. They found a bench away from the main paths, but still in view of other people strolling through the park. "I got your letter," Eleanor said. "And?" Tanner looked nervous, more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Yes, the answer is yes. I'd be honored to have you court me." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "You mean it? You're sure?" "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." Tanner took her hand, a bold gesture in public but one Eleanor welcomed. His hand was warm and strong around hers, calloused from work but gentle in touch. "I promise I'll do right by you, Eleanor. I'll work hard, save money. When the time is right, I'll ask you to marry me proper. But I wanted to court you first, do things the right way." "How long have you been planning this speech?" Eleanor asked, amused and touched. "All week." "Practiced it on the horses. They seemed impressed." Eleanor laughed, and Tanner grinned at her. They sat on the bench holding hands, talking about everything and nothing, while the afternoon sun painted the world in shades of gold. Eleanor told him about learning to sew, about her aunt's gradual warming toward her. Tanner talked about the horses, about his growing friendship with the other ranch hands, about his dreams for the future. "I want my own place someday," he admitted. "Not a big ranch, just a small spread where I can breed good horses, have a house, a family, build something that lasts." "That sounds wonderful," Eleanor said softly. "Would you want that? A life on a small ranch away from town? It'd be hard work, lonely sometimes." Eleanor thought about it honestly. "I think I would. I'm not afraid of hard work, and being with someone you love, building a life together that doesn't sound lonely at all." Tanner's hand tightened on hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Lawrence." "I know it's too soon to say it, but it's true." Eleanor's breath caught. "It's not too soon, because I'm falling in love with you too." They sat in silence, hands clasped, both marveling at the strangeness of it. 2 weeks ago, they'd been strangers. Now they were planning a future together. "I should get you back," Tanner said reluctantly as shadows began to lengthen. "Don't want to get on your aunt's bad side." They walked back slowly, neither wanting to let go of the other's hand. At her aunt's door, Tanner said, "I'll come every Sunday, and I'll write during the week. We'll take this slow, do it right." "I'll count the days until Sunday," Eleanor said. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently, and left. Eleanor watched him go, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Aunt Margaret was waiting inside, her expression unreadable. "You care for him." "I do, very much. He's serious about you. This isn't just dalliance. He wants to court me properly. He talked about marriage, about building a future." Her aunt was silent for a long moment. "All right, if he's serious, I won't stand in your way, but Eleanor, be careful. Guard your heart a little. Life has a way of disappointing us." "I know, Aunt Margaret, but I also know that some things are worth the risk." The autumn weeks passed in a pattern that became precious to Eleanor. During the week, she worked alongside her aunt, learning the sewing trade and taking on more complex projects. Her aunt's customers began requesting her specifically, praising her neat stitches and careful attention to detail. Eleanor took pride in the work, in knowing she was earning her keep and learning a valuable skill. Tanner wrote twice a week, long letters full of details about his work and his thoughts. Eleanor responded with equal frequency, telling him about her days, her dreams, her growing affection for him. The letters were a courtship in themselves, an exchange of hearts and minds that deepened their connection. And every Sunday, Tanner came to Denver. Sometimes they sat in her aunt's parlor, sometimes they walked in the park, once they attended a church social together where Eleanor introduced him to the few people she'd met in Denver. Tanner was always polite, always respectful, always the perfect gentleman. But the attraction between them grew stronger with each visit. Eleanor found herself noticing everything about him, the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the feel of his hand in hers. She dreamed about him at night, woke thinking of him. Her aunt noticed and occasionally made disapproving sounds, but she didn't forbid the courtship. November arrived with cold winds and the promise of snow. Tanner showed up one Sunday bundled in a heavy coat, his cheeks red from the cold. "It's too cold for the park," Eleanor said. "We'll have to stay inside today." They sat in the parlor with the door open, Aunt Margaret knitting in the next room. The intimacy of being inside together felt different, more intense. They sat close on the small settee, their shoulders touching, hands clasped between them. "I have something to tell you," Tanner said. "Mr. Tucker's been real pleased with my work. He's offered me a permanent position as head wrangler, managing all the horse training and breeding. Comes with a raise in pay and a small cabin on the ranch property." "Tanner, that's wonderful," Eleanor said, genuinely happy for him. "It means I can start saving money serious-like. With the raise, I can put aside a good amount each month. Eleanor, what I'm trying to say is that I'm building a foundation, so when I ask you to marry me, you'll know I can provide properly." Eleanor's heart raced. "When you ask me, not if, when," Tanner confirmed, looking into her eyes. "I love you, Eleanor. I want you to be my wife, but I want to do this right, want to be able to offer you security, so I'm asking you to wait for me. Give me time to save up, maybe 6 months or so. Then I'll ask you properly and we can get married." "I'll wait," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I'd wait years for you if I had to, but 6 months sounds perfect." Tanner cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Can I kiss you, just once to seal this promise?" Eleanor glanced toward the dining room where her aunt sat, knowing this was a bold request for a courting couple. But her aunt was studiously focused on her knitting, perhaps giving them a moment of privacy. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. Tanner leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and brushed his lips against hers. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and chaste but filled with promise. Eleanor's eyes fluttered closed, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding as fast as her own. When they parted, both were breathless. Tanner rested his forehead against hers. 6 months, he said. "I'll make it the shortest 6 months you ever lived through." True to his word, Tanner worked hard through the winter. His letters detailed his progress, the money he was saving, the cabin that was being fixed up for his use. Eleanor learned from Mrs. Tucker, who she saw occasionally in town, that Tanner was one of Mr. Tucker's most valued employees, that his skill with horses was becoming known throughout the region. Winter in Denver was cold but beautiful, the city transformed by snow into something magical. Eleanor and Tanner went sledding in Curtis Park one Sunday, laughing like children as they tumbled into snowdrifts. They attended Christmas services together, stood side by side singing hymns while snow fell outside the church windows. On New Year's Eve, Tanner was given permission to stay in town late, and they brought in 1884 together at a community dance, his arms around her as they swayed to the music. 5 more months, he whispered in her ear as midnight struck and people cheered around them. Eleanor's sewing business grew steadily. She'd developed a reputation for beautiful, careful work and had regular customers who kept her busy. She opened a savings account at the First National Bank, adding to it each week. She didn't tell Tanner, but she was saving for their future too, for whatever they might need when they started their life together. In February, Tanner arrived with a new confidence about him. They sat in her aunt's parlor, bundled in shawls and blankets because the fire couldn't quite chase away the winter chill. "Mr. Tucker and I had a long talk this week," Tanner said. "He's getting older, thinking about the future of the ranch. He has no sons and Mrs. Tucker is encouraging him to think about taking on a partner. He's offered me the chance to buy into the ranch, become a junior partner. It'd take most of my savings, but it means part ownership and profit sharing. It means real security, Eleanor." "That's incredible, Tanner. What did you say?" "I told him I needed to talk to you first, because if we're getting married, this affects you too. You think I should take the partnership?" Eleanor's heart swelled at being consulted, at being considered a partner in this decision. "I think you should absolutely take it. It's an amazing opportunity. It means I'll have less saved up when we marry. We'll have enough. We'll build our savings back up together." Tanner pulled her close, heedless of propriety. "I love you so much. Have I told you that today?" "Not in the last hour," Eleanor teased. "Then I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you." March brought signs of spring, the snow melting into mud, early flowers pushing through the earth. Eleanor's birthday came. She turned 22, and Tanner gave her a beautiful shawl he'd commissioned from a weaver in town. Soft wool dyed a blue that matched her eyes. April arrived with warm winds and the greening of the plains. Eleanor and Tanner took long walks every Sunday, talking about their future, making plans. They'd live in the cabin on the Bar T Ranch at first. Eventually, they'd build their own house. They talked about children, both agreeing they wanted several. They discussed everything from what they'd name their future horses to where they'd like to travel someday. On the last Sunday in April, Tanner arrived looking nervous and excited. He asked if they could walk to Curtis Park, and Eleanor agreed, puzzled by his demeanor. The park was beautiful with spring flowers blooming everywhere, trees leafing out in fresh green. Tanner led her to their favorite bench, the one where he'd first asked to court her 6 months ago. "Eleanor Lawrence," he said, taking both her hands in his. "These past 6 months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, falling deeper in love with you every day, planning our future together. You make me want to be a better man. You make me believe in happiness and hope and all the good things I thought might not be for someone like me." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small but beautiful sapphire. "I know we said 6 months, and it's been almost exactly that. Eleanor, I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner, share my life, build a future with me?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Tanner stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her properly this time, not the chaste kiss of their engagement but the passionate kiss of two people deeply in love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "How did you know my size?" she asked, admiring the ring. "I asked your aunt. She measured your finger while you were sleeping one night. My aunt helped you. She knew you were going to propose. I asked her permission first. Figured it was the right thing to do since she's your guardian here. She gave us her blessing. Said I better take good care of you or answer to her." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "When can we get married?" "As soon as you want. I thought maybe June. Gives us time to prepare, but not too long. I don't want to wait forever. June is perfect." They walked back to her aunt's house holding hands, both giddy with joy. Aunt Margaret was waiting, and her stern face broke into a rare smile when she saw Eleanor's ring. So he finally asked. "About time," she said, but her voice was warm. "You knew," Eleanor accused. "Of course I knew. He asked my permission 3 weeks ago. I've been wondering when he'd work up the courage." She turned to Tanner. "You'll be good to her." "I'll spend my life trying to make her happy," Tanner promised. Aunt Margaret nodded. "Then you have my blessing. Now we have a wedding to plan." The next 6 weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Eleanor sewed her own wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with lace trim. Her aunt helped, the two of them working late into the evenings, their relationship deepening as they collaborated on this important project. Mrs. Tucker insisted on hosting the wedding at Tucker House, which had a large parlor perfect for gatherings. The guest list was small: Eleanor's aunt, the Tuckers, a few ranch hands from the bar tea, some of Eleanor's sewing customers who'd become friends, and the pastor from the church they attended. Eleanor wrote to Tanner's sister Sarah in Texas, inviting her to the wedding. To Eleanor's delight, Sarah wrote back that she'd come, bringing her husband and 3 children. She arrived a week before the wedding, a warm and lively woman who embraced Eleanor like a sister from the first moment. "I'm so glad Tanner found you," Sarah said as they sat together one afternoon at Tucker House. "He's been alone too long, wandering from place to place. He needs someone to anchor him, to give him a reason to stay put." "He anchors me too," Eleanor said. "He saved me in so many ways. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't helped me that day at the stage office." "That's Tanner. Always helping people, always putting others first. I'm glad he found someone who appreciates that about him." The day before the wedding, Tanner's cabin on the Bar T Ranch was declared ready. He took Eleanor out to see it, though propriety demanded that Sarah and Mrs. Tucker accompany them as chaperones. The cabin was small but sturdy, one large room with a sleeping area partitioned off, a stone fireplace, windows facing east to catch the morning sun. The Tuckers had furnished it simply but adequately: a bed, a table and chairs, a trunk for storage, a shelf for books and personal items. "It's not much," Tanner said, watching Eleanor's face anxiously. "But it's ours. And Mr. Tucker says in a few years, when the ranch is doing better and I've built up my share of the profits, we can build a proper house if we want." Eleanor walked around the small space, imagining their life here. She'd put curtains on the windows, rag rugs on the floor. They'd fill the shelves with books, hang pictures on the walls. They'd make love in that bed, create children, build a life. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "It's exactly perfect." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the first Saturday in June. Eleanor woke in her aunt's house for the last time, her wedding dress hanging on the wardrobe door, catching the morning light. Aunt Margaret came in without knocking, carrying a cup of tea. She sat on the edge of Eleanor's bed, an unusual intimacy from a woman who generally maintained proper distance. "I want you to have something," she said, pulling a small velvet pouch from her pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a chain. "This was your grandmother's, your father's mother. She wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine. I'd like you to wear it today." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Aunt Margaret, thank you. I'll treasure it. You've been good for me, Eleanor. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you came. Having you here, it's reminded me what family means, what love can look like, even when it's not romantic love. I'm going to miss you when you move to the ranch. It's not far, I'll visit often, and you must come see us too whenever you want." "I will." Her aunt patted her hand. "Now get up. We have a bride to prepare." Eleanor's wedding dress fit perfectly, the ivory silk glowing in the sunlight, the lace trim delicate and beautiful. Sarah helped her arrange her hair, weaving small white roses through the curls. The locket hung around her neck, a connection to family and history. They arrived at Tucker House to find the parlor transformed. Someone had brought in armfuls of flowers, white and yellow roses, sprays of lilac, bunches of wildflowers from the prairie. Chairs were arranged in rows facing a small altar area where the pastor waited. And there was Tanner, looking more handsome than Eleanor had ever seen him, dressed in a new suit, his dark hair combed back, his green eyes bright with emotion as he watched her walk toward him. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They spoke their vows in voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever life brought. Tanner's hand trembled as he slipped the wedding band onto Eleanor's finger. Eleanor's voice broke with happiness as she promised to love him forever. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor said. "You may kiss your bride." Tanner cupped Eleanor's face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that everyone was watching. When they finally broke apart, the small gathering erupted in applause. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed. Mrs. Tucker had prepared a feast. The ranch hands played fiddles and guitars, filling Tucker House with music. Sarah's children ran around laughing. Even Aunt Margaret looked happy, smiling as she watched Eleanor and Tanner dance. As the afternoon faded into evening, Tanner and Eleanor slipped away to a wagon waiting outside, decorated with ribbons and tin cans. The ranch hands had prepared it to take them back to the bar tea, to their cabin and their new life together. The ride through the twilight was quiet and peaceful. Eleanor leaned against Tanner's shoulder, his arm around her, both of them content to simply be together. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful under the darkening sky. Their cabin glowed with lamplight as they approached. Someone, probably Mrs. Tucker, had been there to light the lamps and leave a basket of food on the table. Tanner pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Eleanor down. At the threshold, he swept her up in his arms, making her laugh. "Got to do this proper," he said, carrying her inside and kicking the door closed behind them. He set her down gently, and they stood in the lamplight of their home, looking at each other with wonder and joy and anticipation. "Hello, wife," Tanner said softly. "Hello, husband," Eleanor replied, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Eleanor melted into his arms, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Tanner patient and careful with Eleanor's inexperience. They learned each other slowly, with whispered words and tender touches, creating an intimacy that went beyond the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams until they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Tanner's arms still around her. She felt transformed, utterly happy in a way she'd never imagined possible 6 months ago when she'd stood at that stage office in Ordway, desperate and alone. "Good morning," Tanner murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "How's married life treating you so far?" "It's everything I hoped for and more," Eleanor said, snuggling closer. Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor discovered she loved ranch life, the wide open spaces, the work with animals, the sense of purpose. She helped Tanner with the horses, learning to handle them with the same gentle skill he showed. She kept their cabin spotless and welcoming, cooked meals on the small stove, and continued taking and sewing work from town when time permitted. In the evenings, they'd sit outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. They'd talk about their day, make plans for the future, simply enjoy being together. On Sundays, they'd drive into Denver for church, usually having dinner with Aunt Margaret afterward, By autumn, Eleanor knew she was pregnant. She told Tanner on a cool September evening as they sat outside wrapped in a quilt, "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. "In the spring, around April, I think." Tanner's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, joy, wonder, fear. "A baby. We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" "Happy, Eleanor, I'm thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled." He pulled her close. "We're going to be parents." The pregnancy was relatively easy. Eleanor bloomed with health, her face glowing, her body changing in ways that both she and Tanner marveled at. Tanner became even more protective, constantly worrying about her doing too much work, insisting she rest more. Winter came and went. Eleanor spent the cold months sewing baby clothes, preparing for their child. Aunt Margaret visited often, bringing her own handmade gifts for the baby, her stern exterior fully melted now as she anticipated her first grandniece or nephew. In early April, just as the prairie was beginning to green, Eleanor went into labor. Mrs. Tucker came to help, along with the ranch's cook, who'd assisted at several births. Tanner paced outside the cabin, driven out by Mrs. Tucker, who said he was underfoot. After 8 hours of labor, as dawn broke over the prairie, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He came into the world with a lusty cry, perfect and beautiful. "You have a son," Mrs. Tucker said, placing the baby in Eleanor's arms. Tanner was allowed back in, and Eleanor would never forget the look on his face as he saw his child for the first time. Wonder and love and fierce protectiveness all mixed together. "He's perfect," Tanner whispered, carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. "You're perfect. Thank you for him for this." They named him David, after Eleanor's father, with Thomas as a middle name after Mr. Tucker, who'd become like family to them both. Little David was a good baby, healthy and growing strong. Tanner was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings, walking the floor with David when he fussed, singing to him in a surprisingly good voice. The years that followed were full and happy. Eleanor and Tanner worked hard, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. The Bar T Ranch prospered, and Tanner's reputation as a horse trainer grew. People came from miles around to buy horses trained by Tanner Xavier. 2 years after David's birth, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Sarah, after both grandmothers. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's determination. 3 years after that, another son arrived, James Robert, who looked like Tanner but had Eleanor's calm temperament. They built a proper house on the ranch, a 4-bedroom home with a large kitchen and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Eleanor planted gardens, flowers in front, vegetables on the side. They accumulated livestock, chickens and pigs and milk cows to supplement Tanner's horsework. Aunt Margaret remained a constant in their lives, visiting at least once a month, spending weeks at a time with them after each grandchild was born. The stern woman who'd reluctantly taken Eleanor in had become a loving grandmother who spoiled her grandnieces and nephews shamelessly. Sarah and her family visited from Texas every few years, and the cousins became close despite the distance. Letters flew back and forth, keeping the family connected across the miles. As the children grew, Eleanor sometimes thought back to that desperate day in Ordway when she'd stood at the stage office with insufficient fare and no prospects. She remembered how Tanner had stepped forward, a stranger with kind eyes, and changed her life with a simple act of generosity. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Tanner one night as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. David was 11 now, teaching his younger siblings to ride. Margaret Sarah was 9, all energy and laughter. James was 6, quiet and thoughtful. "Regret what?" Tanner asked, his arm around her shoulders. helping me that day, taking a chance on a desperate stranger." Tanner turned to look at her, his green eyes warm with love. "Eleanor, that was the best decision I ever made. Paying your stage fare bought me everything I ever wanted, a wife I adore, beautiful children, a life beyond anything I dreamed of. I'd do it again 1,000 times." "I love you," Eleanor said, leaning into his embrace. "More now than even on our wedding day." "I love you too. Always have, always will." The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. David grew into a fine young man who shared his father's way with horses. He went to work on a neighboring ranch at 18, courting the rancher's daughter, and married her 2 years later. Eleanor watched her son exchange vows and thought about her own wedding day. How young and scared and hopeful she'd been. Margaret Sarah became a teacher, working at the school in Denver but coming home on weekends to help on the ranch. She was independent and fierce, determined to make her own way in the world. She reminded Eleanor of herself at that age, though Margaret Sarah had more confidence and security than Eleanor ever had. James surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business. He started buying and selling horses on commission while still in his teens, developing a reputation for fair dealing and good judgment. By 21, he'd opened his own livestock brokerage in Denver. Tanner and Eleanor grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became fixtures in the community, respected and loved. Tanner served on the church board. Eleanor organized charity events for widows and orphans, always remembering her own desperate circumstances and wanting to help others in similar situations. Mr. Tucker passed away when Eleanor was 45, leaving his share of the ranch to Tanner in his will. Mrs. Tucker moved into town, though she visited the ranch often. Tanner ran the bar tea with the same care and skill he'd always shown, expanding it gradually until it was one of the most successful horse ranches in Colorado. Aunt Margaret lived to be 78, spending her final years surrounded by family. She died peacefully in her sleep in Eleanor and Tanner's home, in the bedroom they'd prepared especially for her visits that had become permanent in her last year. On what would have been their 30th wedding anniversary, Eleanor and Tanner renewed their vows in the same parlor at Tucker House where they'd married. Their 3 children stood up with them, along with 7 grandchildren. Mrs. Tucker, now in her 80s, dabbed her eyes throughout the ceremony. 30 years, Tanner said that night as they lay in bed, and I'm still as crazy about you as I was that first day on the Stagecoach. I knew you were special right away, Eleanor said. When you paid my fare without asking anything in return, that's when I started falling in love with you, though I didn't recognize it then. Best $12 I ever spent, Tanner said, making Eleanor laugh. They continued working the ranch together well into their 60s, finally handing over day-to-day operations to David and his family when Tanner turned 65. But they never truly retired, always finding ways to help, always involved in the life of the ranch. Eleanor took up painting in her later years, creating beautiful landscapes of the prairie and mountains she loved. Tanner spent his time with the grandchildren, teaching them everything he knew about horses and ranching and life. They traveled some, taking a train to California to see the ocean, visiting Sarah in Texas more often now that they had the time. On a warm June evening, just after their 50th wedding anniversary celebration, Eleanor and Tanner sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their hair was silver now, their faces weathered by decades of prairie sun and wind, but their love was as strong as ever. "Tell me the story again," their youngest granddaughter, 7-year-old Emma, begged. She was David's daughter, already showing signs of being a horse lover like her grandfather. "Which story?" Eleanor asked, though she knew. How you and Grandpa met, how he saved you. Tanner and Eleanor exchanged amused glances. They'd told this story countless times, but it never got old. Well, Eleanor began, I was standing at a stage office in Ordway, Colorado, with $7.30 to my name, and I needed $12 to get to Denver. As she told the familiar story, Emma listened with rapt attention, gasping at the right moments even though she'd heard it dozens of times. Tanner interjected occasionally, adding details or correcting Eleanor's memory. When the story reached its conclusion with their wedding, Emma sighed happily. That's the best story ever. You're going to love each other forever, right? Forever and ever, Tanner confirmed, reaching for Eleanor's hand. As the stars came out over the prairie and Emma ran off to join her cousins, Eleanor reflected on the strange and wonderful journey her life had taken. From desperate poverty to this rich, full life. From loneliness to a love that had sustained her for 50 years. From a frightened young woman with no prospects to a grandmother surrounded by family. All because a cowboy with kind green eyes had stepped forward in her moment of greatest need and changed both their lives forever. What are you thinking? Tanner asked, knowing that distant look in her eyes. I'm thinking about fate, about how a single moment can change everything. What if you hadn't been at that stage office that day? What if you decided not to help? But I was there, and I did help. Some things are meant to be, Eleanor. We were meant to be. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling his steady heartbeat, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Yes, she agreed. We were definitely meant to be. They sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their family, their home, their life. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful, the same prairie where they'd built their dreams together all those years ago. A traveling cowboy had paid her stagecoach fare and rode beside her on a journey that lasted a single day. But that journey had led to a lifetime of love, and Eleanor knew she'd spend eternity grateful for the kindness of a stranger who became everything to her. Inside the house, she could hear her children laughing, her grandchildren playing. The ranch hummed with life and activity. And beside her sat the man who'd given her all of this, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with simple kindness and steady, unwavering love. I love you, Tanner Xavier, Eleanor said into the twilight. I love you too, Eleanor Xavier, he replied. Today, tomorrow, and forever. And in the peace of that moment, surrounded by everything they'd built together, Eleanor knew that forever wouldn't be nearly long enough.